She stood on that wooden platform wearing nothing but a thin white dress, tears streaming down her face, while grown men shouted numbers like she was livestock. But this wasn't some nightmare. This was Tuesday afternoon in Millfield, Kansas, and 19-year-old Cordelia May was about to be sold to the highest bidder. The Silver Dollar Saloon reeked of whiskey and sweat. Silas Crowder, the owner, stood beside the platform with a sick grin, banging his gavel like some twisted auctioneer. His voice boomed over the crowd of miners and drifters who'd gathered for this disgusting spectacle. "Gentlemen, what we have here is a genuine virgin. Fresh as morning dew. Starting bid is $50. Cordelia's hands trembled as she tried to cover herself. She'd been an orphan since 12, scraping by on kitchen work and laundry until last week when Crowder cornered her with an impossible debt. Her dead father's gambling losses that somehow became her burden. Pay up or work it off his way. $60, shouted a toothless miner. $70, called another. Outside, Thaddeus Holloway was tying his horse to the hitching post, planning to grab supplies and head home to his 8-year-old daughter Minerva before dark. He'd been a widower for 3 years, working his small farm and trying to raise his child right in a world that seemed to get meaner every day. But then he heard the shouting from inside the saloon. And the crying. Thaddeus pushed through the batwing doors, expecting to see a card game gone wrong. Instead, his blood turned to ice. There on that platform stood a girl barely older than a child, being auctioned off like property, while men treated her suffering as entertainment. $85, someone yelled. Cordelia's eyes found Thaddeus in the crowd. For a moment, their gazes locked. He saw something in her face that reminded him of his own daughter. Pure terror mixed with desperate hope that someone, anyone, might help. $100. The voice belonged to Buck Morrison, a cattle rancher known for his cruelty to women. Cordelia's face went white. Thaddeus felt his heart pounding. He had exactly $93 in his pocket, money meant for winter supplies, medicine for Minerva, and food to last them through the harsh months ahead. Losing it would mean real hardship, but looking at that terrified girl, then at the predatory faces surrounding her, Thaddeus realized some things mattered more than money. $200. Every head in the saloon turned. Thaddeus stepped forward, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. The crowd murmured in shock. 200 was more than most men made in 6 months. Silas Crowder's eyes lit up with greed. Well, do I hear 210? The room fell silent. Buck Morrison glared at Thaddeus, his hand moving to his gun. "You sure you want to make an enemy today, farmer?" But what Thaddeus said next would change everything and put both their lives in immediate danger. "This girl's coming home with me," Thaddeus announced, his voice cutting through the tension. "But not for what you think." The saloon erupted in confused murmurs. Silas Crowder banged his gavel, eager to close the deal before anyone changed their mind. "Sold to the gentleman farmer for $200. Buck Morrison's face twisted with rage. Nobody outbid Buck Morrison. Nobody humiliated him in front of half the town. His hand stayed near his Colt .45 as he watched Thaddeus count out bills with steady fingers. Cordelia couldn't believe what was happening. She'd prayed for rescue, but rescue usually came with its own price. Men didn't spend that kind of money without expecting something in return. Her whole body shook as she climbed down from the platform. Thaddeus approached her carefully like she was a wounded animal. "Miss, I need you to know something right now. You're safe. I have a daughter your age. And I couldn't stand by and watch this happen. You're not going to," Cordelia whispered, unable to finish the sentence. "No, ma'am. We're walking out of here and you're coming to my farm where you'll have food, shelter, and respect. Nothing more expected. For the first time in days." Cordelia felt like she could breathe, but that relief lasted exactly 30 seconds. Buck Morrison stepped between them and the door. "Hold on there, farmer. Nobody spends $200 on charity. What's your real game here?" "No game. Just doing what's right." "Right?" Buck spat. "Boy, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. That girl owes Crowder money, which means she owes me money. I got a prior claim." Thaddeus felt ice in his veins. "What prior claim?" Silas Crowder suddenly looked nervous. "Now, Buck, we had a deal. Fair auction, fair sale." "Fair?" Buck's voice rose dangerously. "You didn't tell Farmer Boy here about our arrangement, did you, Crowder? About how I already paid you $50 last week for first rights to this little dove." The crowd started backing toward the walls. When Buck Morrison got angry, people tended to get shot. Cordelia grabbed Thaddeus's arm. "Please, just leave me. Don't get killed over someone like me." But Thaddeus had already noticed something that made his stomach drop. 3 of Buck's men had quietly positioned themselves near the exit. 2 more flanked the bar. They weren't just dealing with one angry rancher. They were surrounded. "You got 2 choices, farmer," Buck said, drawing his gun halfway. "Walk away and leave the girl, or try to leave with her and see what happens." Thaddeus looked at Cordelia's terrified face, then at his own hands that had never drawn a gun in anger, hands better suited to plowing fields than gunfights. He thought of Minerva waiting at home, needing her father. The smart choice was obvious, but sometimes doing right means doing stupid. "We're leaving together," Thaddeus said quietly, placing himself between Cordelia and Buck's gun. "And if you want to stop us, you'll have to shoot an unarmed man in front of 20 witnesses." Buck's eyes narrowed. "You think I won't?" "I think you're mean, but you're not stupid. Sheriff Palmer's office is right across the street. You gun down an innocent farmer. You'll hang before sundown." The standoff stretched like pulled wire. Every man in the saloon held his breath, waiting to see who would blink first. Cordelia pressed closer to Thaddeus, feeling the tremor in his hands despite his steady voice. Then Buck started laughing, a cold, ugly sound that made everyone's skin crawl. "You're right, farmer. I ain't stupid, which is why I ain't gonna shoot you here." He holstered his gun with deliberate slowness. "But Millfield's a small town. Roads get mighty dangerous after dark. Accidents happen all the time." Thaddeus felt his throat tighten. Buck was letting them leave, but only so he could hunt them down outside town limits where there'd be no witnesses. "Smart man would take his loss and ride on," Thaddeus replied. "Smart man wouldn't have started this fight." Buck's grin turned predatory. "But you did start it, farmer. And I always finish what gets started." Silas Crowder cleared his throat nervously. "Gentlemen, perhaps we can work something out. Buck, you keep the 50 you already paid me. Farmer gets the girl, you get your money back, everybody's happy." "Nobody's happy," Buck snarled. "I don't want my $50 back. I want what I paid for." Thaddeus guided Cordelia toward the door, moving slowly to avoid triggering violence. The crowd parted like they were walking through a minefield. Every step felt like it might be their last. They made it to the Batwing doors when Buck called out one final time. "Farmer, what's your name? Like to know what to put on your grave marker." Thaddeus paused. Giving his name meant Buck could find his farm, could threaten Minerva. But lying would only delay the inevitable. "Thaddeus Holloway, and you won't need a marker, because I don't plan on dying today." They stepped into the afternoon sunlight, but freedom felt like an illusion. Main Street stretched before them like a gauntlet. Thaddeus's horse waited at the hitching post, but his farm was 8 miles away through empty prairie. 8 miles where Buck Morrison could do whatever he wanted without consequences. Cordelia whispered urgently, "There's something you need to know about Buck. Something Crowder didn't tell you." "What?" "He's not just mean. 3 months ago, he killed a preacher's daughter who tried to run from him. Sheriff Palmer covered it up because Buck owns half this county." Thaddeus felt his world tilt. He'd just signed their death warrants and the law wouldn't lift a finger to help them. But as they reached his horse, Cordelia noticed something that made her blood freeze. A small figure was running toward them down Main Street, calling out in a child's voice, "Papa! Papa! You're back!" It was Minerva, and she was heading straight into the most dangerous situation of her young life. Thaddeus's heart stopped as his 8-year-old daughter came running down the dusty street, her blonde braids bouncing, completely unaware of the danger surrounding them. Minerva had disobeyed his strict instructions to stay with Mrs. Henderson and somehow made it to town alone. "Minerva, stop!" he called out, but she was too excited to listen. Behind them, Buck Morrison emerged from the saloon with his men, and Thaddeus saw the exact moment when Buck's cruel mind started working. The rancher's eyes locked onto the approaching child, and his grin became something monstrous. "Well, well," Buck said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like Farmer Boy brought his little girl to town. Sweet thing, ain't she?" Cordelia grabbed Thaddeus's arm. "He's going to use her against you." Minerva reached them, breathing hard from her run. "Papa, Mrs. Henderson got sick and I was scared, so I came to find you and—" She stopped mid-sentence, noticing the strange woman beside her father and the tense faces all around them. "Honey," Thaddeus said carefully, "I need you to get behind me and stay very quiet." But Buck was already moving closer, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "That's a mighty pretty daughter you got there, Holloway. Be a real shame if something happened to her on account of your poor judgment." The threat hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. This wasn't just about him and Cordelia anymore. Buck had just made it clear that Minerva was now part of this deadly game. "You touch one hair on her head," Thaddeus started. You'll what? Buck interrupted. Fight me? You ain't even armed, farmer, but I tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give you one last chance to be smart. Leave the girl here with me and walk away. Your daughter goes home safe, you go home safe, everybody's happy. Leave Cordelia with you mean? That's exactly what I mean. Thaddeus felt the impossible weight of the choice crushing down on him. Save Cordelia and risk his daughter's life, or sacrifice Cordelia to protect Minerva. Either decision would destroy something inside him. Minerva tugged on his coat. Papa, I'm scared. Who is this man? Cordelia knelt down beside the little girl. Honey, my name's Cordelia. Your papa's trying to help me, but it's gotten complicated. Are you in trouble? Yes. Sweetheart, bad trouble. Minerva looked up at her father with those trusting blue eyes that reminded him so much of her mother. Papa always helps people in trouble. Mama taught him that. The innocence in her voice made Thaddeus's chest tight. His wife Sarah had indeed taught him to stand up for those who couldn't defend themselves. But Sarah had never faced Buck Morrison. Buck stepped closer, his patience clearly running out. Time's up, farmer. What's it gonna be? If you were Thaddeus, what would you do? Sacrifice an innocent girl to save your own daughter, or risk everything to protect them both? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose. Because what Thaddeus decided next would either make him a hero, or get them all killed. Thaddeus looked at his daughter, then at Cordelia, then at the crowd of onlookers who were watching this drama unfold like it was entertainment. In that moment, he realized something that changed everything. You're right, Buck, I'm not armed. Thaddeus's voice carried a strange calm. But you're wrong about one thing. Yeah? What's that? You think this is just between you and me. But look around. Buck frowned, momentarily confused, and that confusion was about to cost him everything. Thaddeus gestured toward the growing crowd that had spilled out of shops and businesses to watch the confrontation. Half this town's been watching you threaten a child. Buck, Sheriff Palmer might be in your pocket, but Judge Crawford ain't, and neither is the territorial marshal who's due through here next week. Buck's confidence flickered for just a moment, but it was enough. Thaddeus pressed his advantage. You see, Buck, you made this public, real public, and now everyone's gonna remember the day Buck Morrison threatened to hurt an 8-year-old girl because her daddy wouldn't let him buy a woman like she was cattle. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thaddeus was right. This had become a spectacle, and Buck's reputation for cruelty was now on full display in front of the entire town. Furthermore, Thaddeus continued, his voice growing stronger, that woman you're so desperate to claim, she's got family coming to look for her. Cordelia, tell him about your brother. Cordelia caught on immediately. My brother James rides with the Pinkertons. He'll be here within the week, and he don't take kindly to men who hurt his sister. It was a complete lie, but Buck didn't know that. The Pinkerton Detective Agency was feared throughout the West, and even Buck Morrison didn't want that kind of trouble. Buck's face reddened with rage and frustration. His perfect plan was unraveling in front of everyone. You think you're real clever, don't you, farmer? I think I'm real tired of this conversation, Thaddeus replied. Minerva, Cordelia, get on the horse. But as they moved toward the hitching post, Buck made a desperate play. Tommy, Jake, block their path! 2 of Buck's men stepped forward, hands on their guns. The crowd gasped and started backing away. This was about to turn into a bloodbath on Main Street. That's when an unexpected voice cut through the tension. I wouldn't do that if I were you boys. Everyone turned to see Doc Whitman emerging from his office across the street. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came Reverend Mills, shopkeeper Harold Chen, and 6 other townsmen, all armed. Doc Whitman adjusted his spectacles and addressed Buck directly. Morrison, we've had enough of your bullying in our town. These good people have done nothing wrong, and we won't stand by and watch you terrorize a child. Buck looked around wildly. Suddenly, his 5 men seemed awfully outnumbered. The crowd that had been passive observers was now clearly taking sides, and they weren't taking his. This ain't over, Buck snarled. Yes, it is, Doc Whitman said firmly. Pack up your men and ride out. Today, and don't come back to Millfield. For a moment, it looked like Buck might draw anyway. Consequences be damned. His hand hovered over his gun while 8 armed men faced him down. Then Silas Crowder made everything worse. Buck, you still owe me $300 from last month's poker game. Maybe it's time to settle accounts. Buck's face went white. He'd forgotten about that debt. And now he was cornered financially as well as physically. But what Crowder said next would spark the violence everyone was trying to avoid. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button because it's about to get even more intense. Matter of fact, Crowder continued with a nasty smile, I think that debt just transferred to our new friends here. Congratulations, farmer. You just inherited Buck Morrison's biggest problem. The implications of Crowder's words hit everyone at once. If Buck owed Crowder money, and Crowder was transferring that debt to Thaddeus, it meant Buck now had a legal claim that he could pursue through violence. That's not how debts work. Crowder, Doc Whitman said sharply. Actually it is, came a new voice from the crowd. Judge Crawford himself had arrived, drawn by the commotion. If Crowder wants to assign Morrison's debt to Holloway, that's his right. But, he continued, raising his voice as Buck started to grin, Morrison would have to agree to the transfer, and the debt would have to be legitimate. Buck's grin faded. Judge Crawford was known for his strict interpretation of the law, and he clearly wasn't intimidated by anyone. Show me the paperwork, Crowder, the judge demanded. Silas Crowder's face went pale. There was no paperwork because the poker debt was actually fictional, a desperate attempt to create leverage. Well, you see, Judge, it was a gentleman's agreement. No paperwork means no legal debt, Crawford announced. Morrison, you and your men have exactly 10 minutes to leave town before I charge you with disturbing the peace and threatening children. Buck's last card had been played and lost. His men were already backing toward their horses, clearly eager to avoid a shooting war with half the town. But Buck Morrison had never been one to accept defeat gracefully. This ain't over, Holloway, he spat. Not by a long shot. You cost me money, you cost me face, and you made me look like a fool. I got a long memory and longer reach than you think. Thaddeus helped Cordelia and Minerva onto his horse. I reckon it is over, Buck. You lost fair and square. Fair? Buck's laugh was bitter. Boy, you don't know the first thing about fair. But you're gonna learn. As Buck and his men rode out of town, the crowd began to disperse. Doc Whitman approached Thaddeus with a concerned expression. Son, you did the right thing today, but Morrison's not the type to forget a grudge. You might want to consider staying in town for a few days, let things cool down. Thaddeus shook his head. Can't do it, Doc. I got a farm to run and animals to feed. Besides, running scared just invites more trouble. Then take this. Doc Whitman pressed something into Thaddeus's hand, a small Derringer pistol. It ain't much, but it's better than nothing. Cordelia looked at the little gun with obvious fear. Maybe the doctor's right. Maybe we should wait. No, Thaddeus said firmly. We leave now, while we have daylight and witnesses to our departure. Buck's more likely to try something if we look afraid. They were preparing to leave when Minerva tugged on her father's sleeve. Papa, the lady seems sad. Is she gonna be okay? Thaddeus looked at Cordelia, really looked at her for the first time since this all started. She was pale, shaking, and clearly traumatized by everything that had happened. Cordelia, he said gently, are you all right? She shook her head slowly. I don't understand why you helped me. Men don't usually help without wanting something. My wife taught me that protecting innocent people is what separates us from animals. You're innocent, and you needed protecting. Tears started flowing down Cordelia's cheeks. Your wife sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. And she'd want me to make sure you're safe. But as they finally rode out of Millfield toward Thaddeus's farm, none of them noticed the lone rider who had been watching from the hills above town. Buck Morrison had sent one of his men ahead to scout the route home. The real danger was just beginning. The ride to Thaddeus's farm should have taken 40 minutes. They made it halfway before the shooting started. It happened at Devil's Canyon, the narrow pass where the road wound between two rocky hills. Thaddeus had always hated this stretch. Too many places for ambushes, too few escape routes. The first bullet shattered the silence, kicking up dust inches from their horses' hooves. Thaddeus immediately pulled the reins, steering them behind a large boulder as more shots rang out. Stay down, he shouted, covering Minerva and Cordelia with his body. From the hills above came Buck Morrison's voice, ugly with triumph. Thought you were real smart back in town, didn't you, farmer? But out here, ain't no judge to protect you. Thaddeus counted the muzzle flashes. 4 men on the left ridge, 2 on the right. They were completely surrounded with nowhere to run. What do you want, Buck? Thaddeus called out. I want my property back. And I want you to pay for making me look like a fool. Cordelia grabbed Thaddeus's arm. Just give me to him. Don't let him hurt Minerva because of me. Nobody's giving anybody to anybody, Thaddeus said firmly. He pulled out Doc Whitman's Derringer, knowing it held only 2 shots against 6 armed men. Minerva was crying softly. Papa, I'm scared. I know. Honey, just stay behind this rock and don't move no matter what happens. Another volley of shots peppered their hiding spot. Buck was clearly enjoying this, drawing it out, terrorizing them before moving in for the kill. Then Thaddeus heard something that made his heart race. Hoofbeats. More riders approaching fast from the direction of town. "Buck!" shouted a familiar voice. "This is Judge Crawford. You're surrounded." The shooting stopped abruptly. Thaddeus risked a look around the boulder and saw an amazing sight. Doc Whitman, Reverend Mills, and 8 other townsmen had ridden out after them, armed and ready for a fight. "You got no authority out here, Crawford," Buck yelled back. "I got all the authority I need. You're threatening innocent people in my jurisdiction." "Your jurisdiction ends at the town limits. Not when I'm pursuing criminals who disturbed the peace in my town." For several tense minutes, the two groups faced off across the canyon. Buck's 6 men against Crawford's 9. The odds had shifted dramatically. Then Cordelia did something that shocked everyone. She stood up from behind the boulder, fully exposing herself to Buck's guns. "Buck Morrison!" she called out in a voice that carried clearly across the canyon. "I got something to tell you about Silas Crowder that's gonna change everything." "Cordelia, get down!" Thaddeus hissed. But she ignored him, her voice growing stronger. "Buck, you want to know why Crowder was so eager to auction me off? You want to know the real reason he set this whole thing up?" Buck's curiosity got the better of his anger. "What are you talking about, girl? Crowder's been stealing from you for months, that poker debt he mentioned. He made it up because he's been skimming from your cattle sales. I kept his books. I know where he hides the money." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Buck's voice came back, but now it was directed at his men. "Boys, I think we've been shooting at the wrong people." Buck Morrison rode down from the ridge, his gun still drawn but no longer pointed at them. His face showed the dangerous calculation of a man whose anger had found a new target. "You saying Crowder's been stealing from me?" Buck demanded. Cordelia nodded, her hands trembling but her voice steady. 3 months I worked in that saloon keeping his ledgers. Every cattle deal you made, every sale, every transaction, Crowder took 20% off the top and doctored the books to hide it. Where's the money? Hidden in a false bottom of his office safe. Has to be close to $2,000 by now. Buck's eyes went cold as winter. $2,000 was serious money, enough to buy a small ranch or pay a dozen men's wages for a year. If Cordelia was telling the truth, Crowder had been stealing his future. Judge Crawford rode closer, keeping his rifle ready. "Morrison, this doesn't change what you did here today. Attempted murder is still attempted murder." But Buck was already backing away. "Judge, I think we got a misunderstanding here. I was just trying to recover stolen property. My money that Crowder stole. By shooting at innocent people? Warning shots," Buck said with a straight face. "Just trying to get their attention." Thaddeus knew Buck was lying, but he also knew the man was looking for a way out that didn't involve more gunfight. Smart men took the exits they were offered. "So we're done here?" Thaddeus asked carefully. Buck looked at Cordelia one more time, and for a moment his old hunger flickered in his eyes. Then the practical side of his nature won out. "Girl, you come testify about Crowder's thievery, and we're square. You helped me recover my stolen money. I'll forget about our other business." Cordelia nodded quickly. "I'll tell Judge Crawford everything I know." "Good enough." Buck turned his horse toward town. "Boys, we got a saloon keeper to visit." As Buck and his men rode away, Thaddeus finally allowed himself to breathe. The immediate danger was over, but he knew Cordelia had just made herself a very valuable witness, and potentially a target for Crowder. Judge Crawford approached them with a relieved expression. "That was quick thinking, young lady, but you realize Crowder's going to be mighty unhappy when he finds out what you just did." "Crowder can't hurt me anymore," Cordelia said with surprising confidence. "I'm not alone now." She looked at Thaddeus and Minerva, and for the first time since this all began, she smiled. It was a small smile, fragile as spring ice, but real. The ride back to Thaddeus's farm was peaceful. Minerva chattered excitedly about the adventure, already turning it into a grand story in her mind. Cordelia rode quietly, still processing her newfound freedom. As they approached the small farmhouse with its neat garden and white-painted fence, Cordelia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. "It's not much," Thaddeus said apologetically, "but it's safe and there's always enough food." "It's perfect," Cordelia whispered, and meant it. Over the following weeks, Cordelia testified against Silas Crowder, who was arrested for theft and forced to close his saloon. Buck Morrison, surprisingly, kept his word and left her alone, apparently satisfied with recovering his stolen money and seeing Crowder ruined. Cordelia found her place on the farm, helping with cooking, mending, and teaching Minerva to read. Thaddeus discovered that having another adult around made the hard work of farming easier, and the quiet evenings less lonely. They never spoke of love, but it grew between them like wildflowers, quietly, naturally, without forcing. 1 year later, when Reverend Mills married them in the little church in Millfield, the whole town came to celebrate. Even Judge Crawford attended, commenting that it was nice to see a story that started with such ugliness and with such beauty. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, but sometimes if you're very lucky it gives you everything you never knew you needed. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of courage, redemption, and the untamed American West, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We've got many more stories that will take you back to a time when honor meant everything, and a man's word was his bond. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video now.